Good morning to those joining from the Americas and good afternoon to those joining us from Europe. My name is Laia Greeno and I'm Senior Manager for Transparency, Accountability and Results at Interaction. And I also co-chair the International Aid Transparency Initiative CSO Working Group along with Bond. Sorry a bit for the delay, but glad that everyone could join us this morning for this webinar on sharing data responsibly. So this is the third in a recent series of webinars that we've been organizing as part of Interaction's NGO Aid Map initiative, which is what you're seeing now on your screen. This is an online tool that showcases our members' work around the world at the project level, and you can think of it sort of as an IATI light, and we do hope to make this initiative IATI compliant at some point soon. So the purpose of the webinars we've been holding is to highlight what organizations can do to share information more effectively and efficiently through things like NGO Aid Map as well as IATI. And in today's webinar, we'll be hearing from the UK's Department for International Development and the United Nations Development Programme, who will discuss the processes they've set up to ensure that sensitive information isn't publicly disclosed as a result of their organization's efforts to publish information to IATI. So I'd like to thank our two presenters for their willingness to share their organization's experiences. On our agenda for today, first we'll hear from John Adams, who is head of DFID's Business Innovation Team and also chairs the IATI Technical Advisory Group. And then we'll hear from Mark Cardwell, Chief of Online Communications at UNDP. We'll then have about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. For those of you who are new to these webinars, you are on mute and you'll remain on mute for the duration of the webinar. But if you have a question, please type it into the question box and I'll pose it on your behalf. And you should feel free to type your questions in as you think of them. You don't necessarily have to wait for the Q&A period. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And I think we'll get started right away. So John, I'm going to make you the presenter right now.
Okay, thank you, Laia. And let me just good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending where you're coming from. As Laia said, yeah, my name's John Adams. I run a couple of teams within DFID, and one of them is the team that does the technical underpinning of publishing our IATI data. We were the first organization to publish IATI back in January 2011, so that's coming on for nearly 4 years ago. And I think as the first organization to begin to publish IATI data, we've had a lot of the conversations that you guys are already having around sensitivity about when to publish and when not to publish. I'm not sure we've 100% cracked all the problems, but at least we have some way and some framework for which to frame that conversation and to at least publish the data that we need to. In terms of volume, we're one of the bigger publishers. We have nearly 14,000 IATI activities. Because we use hierarchies in our system, that equates to around about just over 4,000 projects. And we're seeing a growth, as you can see on the graph there, we're seeing a growth of around about 100 new projects every month. And in terms of sensitivity, a lot of the thrust of our sensitivity work is looking at those new projects every month and working out whether there's sensitive information within those. We then reuse our IATI information to produce the UK's development tracker, which takes IATI data from DFID, from other parts of UK government, and from some of our implementing agencies, NGOs, private sector organisations, and so on, and joins those together. So we're quite invested in IATI because IATI effectively is the public front of our organisation and of the work that we do. All of our project information, we have a policy which means that disclosure is presupposes disclosure. Disclosure is mandated right from the top, from a letter from the Prime Minister to our department back in 2010. but also from some of our policies, including the Aid Transparency Guarantee, which effectively says that we will publish as much information as we possibly can on UK's aid projects. So all of our information is disclosable to the public under our transparency policy, and just in the same way that a lot of our information is also disclosable to the public under our freedom of information legislation, and there's quite a good overlap between the two. We can exclude sensitive information where necessary, which equates to us to around about less than 5% of our total project portfolio is excluded, either fully excluded or partially excluded. That means some parts of our projects are excluded. So less than 5% of over 4,000 projects are excluded. Why are they excluded? We have really five reasons, as you can see on the screen there. And our numbers, depending on the type of exclusions, the numbers of exclusions in each reason sort of creeps up. But first of all, international relations. We don't want to release things which are potentially publicly critical of other government organizations or other international organizations, or which end up being something that should be dealt with by a diplomatic channel, should not be dealt with on a transparency channel. And I think you can probably think of some of the discussions that really need to go on in private between countries, which should not necessarily be exercised on transparent data. That doesn't mean the data never becomes transparent. It just means that maybe for now it's sensitive for those reasons. Security and safety we take very seriously. Because of the places where we work, security and safety of our staff, of our contractors, of the agencies with whom we work is quite paramount. So we make sure that we're not publishing supplier names in parts of the world where if people knew who those suppliers were, it could actually bring them into danger, that type of thing. So that's quite a big context-specific thing. We don't publish personal information. We're covered by so much legislation on personal information that we need to be very careful not to publish the names of individuals who are not legal entities or traders. So we take some measures to do that. And we also don't publish commercially sensitive information. Again, this is generally time-bound. A classic example would be that we would not publish the full budget of a project if by publishing that full budget it meant that we would not get value for money, we would not get proper competition among the suppliers, or we would not publish commercially sensitive information which was giving away things that suppliers, secrets of our suppliers. And finally, we're also covered by other policies and regulations. So sometimes, again, a timing thing. Our ministers may want to announce something, and actually it's better for us to not publish in advance of that announcement, but to have things ready to go in sync with that announcement. Or there may be other legislation that comes in and governs us. We can exclude a whole range of things. It's not just a binary exclusion. So, for example, we set up we can exclude a whole project. So if the very existence of that project would fall under one of those previous categories, then we can just say that project doesn't get published. But more likely, it's things like sub-project or component exclusions, and this applies particularly where we've got commercial sensitivity, where we're running a procurement exercise on a particular sub-project at that time, and we don't want to give away the total amount of budget or any other financial information. We would hide just that component, but the rest of the project and the context and everything would be published. We can exclude documents, either individual documents or groups of documents, again depending on the timing and the sensitivity. And we can exclude supplier details, supplier names. When we exclude suppliers, we will always publish the what we've bought and the amount that has cost us, but we may not publish who we have actually purchased that thing from, whether they be services or goods. And the process for exclusion, we've tried to make this quite robust and requires senior sign-off. So in order to have an exclusion, a person running a project has to, we're a civil service department, so they have to complete a form. But that also means that we capture the details of why did they want to exclude it, what period did they want it excluded for, what would happen if we do publish that information, what's the impact assessment, and that form has to be signed off by someone at director level or above, which means that it gets really senior oversight. It's not just somebody in a project deciding, ooh, a bit uncomfortable with that. They actually have to make a proper business case for it. We have that reviewed by our publication hub centrally, and then for new projects, those exclusions will go forward to one of our ministers, who will then also scrutinize the reason for exclusion. So it's quite a robust process. But it doesn't stop there. We carry out continuing review of those exclusions to make sure that we're not just keeping things unpublished, where actually it's time bound and it could be published now. So we go ahead and we review those regularly. And finally, in my part of the conversation, I think we do still, even after 4 years, we still have some areas where we would like to make some improvement. There's some areas where we're seeing a little bit of pain. One of those is we're rewriting our project management system at the moment, and we're wondering whether we integrate exclusions into that. Instead of somebody writing a form and emailing it to someone else, do we include that within a workflow within the project management system, so that there's still an approval step, but it's actually recorded on the system, and then we can go back and look at some of the history of projects going in and out of exclusions. So that might be useful. In IATI 1.05, there's a new suspended status for a project, and actually should we be using that more rather than exclusions, where for some cases we suspend projects because of concerns about risks in country or whatever. Maybe we should be using the suspended status rather than excluding the project in the future. And the final thing is around emergency processes. On occasion, human beings will make mistakes, and they may end up publishing documents which may have people's names on them or may contain sensitive commercial information. And we need to have ways of putting that information back off Development Tracker and back off our IATI data very quickly. At the moment, that involves me calling a developer and going, can you remove that, please? But there may be slicker ways of doing that. Although, to be honest, it doesn't happen more than 2 or 3 times a year, thank goodness. But those are some of the considerations we're thinking of for the future. That's everything from me. I'm very happy to answer your questions during the Q&A. I'll hand you back to Laia.
Great, thanks so much, John. That was interesting to hear how DFID approaches things, and now I'm going to turn it over to Mark to give his presentation, and then we'll move to the Q&A.
Thanks very much. Again, I'm Mark Cardwell, and I'm with UNDP. And let me see if I can go through a quick presentation. I would say that our approach is similar to the approach that DFID takes, although we have a slightly different history. We are sort of data disclosure, information disclosure policy precedes IATI. We started in 2007. Let's see if I can make this full frame.
Mark, if you click on the icon just at the there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
So in 2007, you'll see that we created this information disclosure policy, and we worked with all of our units to make sure that project information was disclosed. And part of the advantage of doing that in 2007 was we didn't have all the standards and the power that IATI brings to it, but we did discover some of the issues. And our primary issues at UNDP are around security. For example, if we're working in Afghanistan, it's such a complex and sensitive situation. We'll want to be careful about what kind of information we disclose. Although I should say we still disclose all of our project information in Afghanistan, but at a high level. We don't necessarily disclose every document. You can see that in particular we approached it starting in 2007 in a very plain language way. I'd sort of say, what do we want to do? And we've in 2008 started posting all of that information on websites.
Mark, could you just talk a little bit louder?
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so in 2008 we posted this information on the websites, and again we surfaced some issues, generally around procurement situations where we've disclosed particularly individual contractors' information that we shouldn't have. So, and we tracked all this internally with a balanced scorecard. So we internally tracked all of the efforts of disclosure by our country offices. When we started down the road with IATI, we put together an internal cleanup tool so that we told all of our business units what we were going to disclose as part of IATI so that they could take a look and see what was sensitive. And then we went through and in this internal tool looked at how compliant a particular country office was with our information disclosure standards in order to deliver on IATI. So we published a basic data set that had very limited project data and sort of incrementally saw what the issues were in disclosing that data. And then we have worked to update our disclosure policy. And our exceptions are right exactly along the lines of what John talked about, where if there's a particular security risk, if it's expected to be exchanged in a confidential manner, and if there's some sort of commercial risk, these are the exceptions to our information disclosure policy. But the overall principle is a bias for disclosure. And I would say that the entire organization really has this bias, and we sort of default to publishing everything. So now we publish a IATI data set on a project portal just like DFID does on their aid tracker. We publish it on open.undp, and we have project documents and project details for over 8,000 projects. So I wanted to just quickly add to what John was saying, is that we find that we have some exceptions. We don't have a lot of issues coming up, but I would say in probably the same frequency, about 3 to 4 times a year, we'll find some issue with something that's been disclosed. And I think that the biggest issue we have currently at UNDP is with vendors. Individuals, but it can also be a company that hasn't realized that part of the way of doing business with the UN system is that your procurement is in the open, your contracting is in the open, and the award amount is in the open. And in most cases, it's not so much a violation of our policy, but it's an issue with the relationship with our vendors. Before I got to UNDP, we had some issues where we were disclosing accidentally, well, we were disclosing intentionally the names and salaries of key consultants, which is part of our policy, but we had some places where $100,000 consultancy put the individual at risk for kidnapping, for example. So we've modified that in these security situations so that if there's a risk, if it's a high-risk environment, we'll not disclose our partners in that environment. But I would say I can't think of a single exception where we don't have a project at least published at a minimal level for every project that we run. We may not provide all the documentation if there's a risk, but we provide some level of detail on every project that we're running. So that's really all I have to say. I'd really like to hear the questions that come. I think that's, I'm sure people are burning up with some questions.
Great, thanks so much, Mark. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in, and these are directed at John, but Mark, if you have any relevant experience that you'd like to add, please feel free to jump in. Oh, but actually, before I turn it over to the questions that have come in, we do have Wendy Rogers, who's an IATI support analyst with the IATI Secretariat, and she's constantly providing support to organizations seeking to publish to IATI. So Wendy, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Hi everyone, thanks Lai. Yeah, just a couple of things I wanted just to pick up on really, and both Mark and John alluded to the fact that when they're looking at exclusions, you can obviously do it at different levels in terms of do you exclude maybe an entire project or perhaps just certain pieces of information. So I really just wanted to sort of add and sort of reiterate really that from an IATI perspective, we would obviously want to encourage publishers to make as much information available as possible. And we know from experience that when there are issues of confidentiality or security or whatever, I think the general instinct is actually to exclude everything. But what I would just sort of say is actually taking a much more sort of risk management approach and actually thinking about what are the key pieces of information that you want to exclude rather than perhaps necessarily excluding a whole project. So that's certainly something we would like to encourage sort of from our perspective really. So we do still have information about projects provided, but obviously with the the key pieces of information that perhaps need to be excluded, obviously just omitted in those sort of cases, but the general project information being available.
Great, thanks Wendy, and that's the approach we take with NGO Aid Map as well. Obviously we don't want to put anyone at risk through sharing information, but so encourage everyone to disclose as much as possible, but if there's certain pieces of information that shouldn't be disclosed, then they can not include that as part of the project information they share with us. So we do have questions coming in. First, just on behalf of the audience, they've said that this is very informative and valuable for everyone, so thank you, Mark and John. So to the questions. The first question, I guess, John, if you could elaborate a bit more at which level of detail DFID excludes data, so project level, activity level, and then perhaps you'll understand this maybe better than I do. Do you exclude data at the row level in some cases and column level in other cases?
Oh, that's an interesting one. We don't tend to think of it in terms of row and columns, but if you go back to the slide I showed about what we exclude, so for a particular project, we could potentially exclude just the supplier name, which would be a single field, and we'd replace that with supplier name withheld as a field. We could exclude a document, in which case it just wouldn't turn up in the document list. We don't exclude transactions as a whole because we always want to give a full financial picture, if possible, of the spend and the disbursements. Although when a project is going through a procurement stage, we won't show any financial information, including budget and transactions for that project. That's probably more a pragmatic step than, ideally you just want to not show the budget, but it's more about the way that we can split off that granularity. Does that answer the question?
I will let you know if I get a no. Yes, it does.
Okay.
This question is for both you and Mark, and it relates to the information you publish about your partners. So first, a question about whether, as part of your process, you require that NGOs or your other partners review the data and exclude sensitive data before delivering it to you. And then secondly, have you ever had instances where partners or contractors requesting confidentiality that you've denied that request? How do you deal with those situations, and have you lost any partners or contractors as a result of that? So John or Mark, maybe you want to go first.
On the first question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You want? I'd say at UNDP, I can't think of a situation where exactly that's happened. But in the second case, we have had people come to us and say, we don't want this made public, and in every case that's come up, and it's not been that many, we've said, well, this doesn't fall under one of the exceptions of the information disclosure policy, and so we're going to deny that, and we're not going to restrict that information, and we're going to continue to keep it out there. And we haven't lost any partners or vendors, to my knowledge, because of that. In fact, it's often the opposite. We have partners that come to us and say, is it okay that we share this information of a UNDP project, and we say yes, of course. I mean, it's not that there aren't sensitive situations, and we have had some partners who have an issue with us publishing a project, but we've never completely taken a project off because it's core to our transparency to have a full accounting of the projects. But if there's a particular document that reveals sensitive information, we have done that.
Great. What about you, John? Are NGOs or contractors involved in the process of deciding what might be sensitive, and has this transparency guarantee or DFID's transparency policy affected your relations with partners or contractors?
I think the Aid Transparency Guarantee is really the policy statement which says that we expect anybody who receives UK funding to be equally transparent with their own information about particular activities that we've funded. And that's part of the reason why the vast majority of IATI publishing NGOs and even private sector organisations are those that have a direct relationship with the UK. We have shared with all of those people the same exclusions policy that we operate, and we would expect them to be applying the same principle. We certainly don't want people to be sharing information that's inappropriate or would lead to someone being in danger. So we expect them to apply those principles when they publish their own IATI data. And I think we owe a lot of conversation that Wendy's had with NGOs and implementing partners has really been around clarifying some of those exclusions and making sure that there's a clear policy in place. In terms of losing contractors over that level of disclosure, I couldn't hand on heart say we haven't. But I think what's more important is that we entered into a period of engagement and discussion and clarification with all our contractors, NGOs, private sector partners as well. Even right back in the early days when we said we're going to publish your name, the supplier names, that was accompanied by a good bit of communications with the supplier community and a change in the terms and conditions on the default contract. So I think talking to people, being clear with them what you're about to do, why you're doing it, explain the reasons, I think that goes a long way towards making it less of an imposition and more of a something that people can buy into.
Mm-hmm. And related to this, do you have a sense of what the most cited reasons for exclusions are, either from your partners or from DFID itself? Like what exclusion reason comes up the most? Is it procurement sensitivity? Is it security risks? Do either of you have a sense for that?
I did a quick query earlier today on our current exclusions. Some of our data is a little bit incomplete, but I think the broad thing is that for commercial exclusions is mainly where something's in procurement. So that would be if we have a component of a project excluded, it'll be generally due to procurement. If we have a supplier name redacted, that will generally be due to safety and security. If we have a project completely excluded, it's either usually due to international relations or safety and security.
Great.
So there tends to be, we tend to see all of the reasons and all of the exclusions, but you tend to get, sort of particular types of exclusions suit a particular reason a lot better.
Great. Mark, did you want to add anything to that?
And I would just agree. Again, it's just a handful of times that we've excluded material, but it's generally because of safety and security, so we'll withhold the name or redact the name of a supplier, or there are some cases where there's an international relations component, and I can think of two contexts there. So, we've been doing this for more than 5 years, and we've only had a handful of exceptions. And in fact, we have a person on our team who actually goes through and regularly checks to see if material hasn't been inappropriately classified as confidential, and we actually actively push our business units and country offices to explain why that's been marked confidential, because we want the bias again to be towards openness. And so I think all of it. I hope people can take away the general guidance that if you have a pretty clear information disclosure policy, and you have a culture of openness, and even if you don't have a culture of openness, if you have this policy to lean on, it's really a minimal amount of exceptions that we're talking about, and keep things safe, secure, and do business. And in fact, I feel like rather than lose partners because we're disclosing things, I feel like our bias towards transparency and openness helps us have actually a strategic advantage. I think a lot of people look at the UN specifically, but more broadly sort of government and UN procurement as some kind of black box, and any kind of light we can shed into that makes people feel better about working with us. So I really think it's a net positive in every way.
Great. Thanks, Mark. This question is sort of along the same lines and applies to John because of the the DFID, a transparency guarantee, which requires grantees to publish. But I should say that other governments are planning to take this step as well. So the question is, maybe, what are your thoughts on the compatibility of exclusion policies and possibly additional confidential channels to exchange data? So for example, you might like to have more data from a grantee, but they exclude it from their publishing because of their exclusion policies. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure it's something we've come across. We collaborate quite well with partners on a number of different levels, and on the very basic level, that could be a very simple email inter-exchange, or people working on a collaborative document together or something like that. I think we need to separate the transparency publication from the day-to-day collaboration that people will do when they're working with partners. The transparency publication is very much about publishing a record of what we've done, but publishing that as near real time as possible. So we encourage our partners to be very frequent in their publication, to also clearly link back to the funding project that we have, and I think I think we'd encourage as much of that publication as possible. What we haven't done yet is actually gone in and reviewed the completeness of our partners and actually use that as a benchmark or a league table with each of them. I think that's probably something we would consider doing as a way of actually helping people improve the standard and improve the way that things are linking back. But I don't see it as a break to. I see publication and collaboration as being slightly different things.
Great, thanks, John. For those of you in the audience, if you have any last burning questions since we are reaching the end, please pose them right now, and we might be able to sneak it in. The last two questions I have are quick ones. So, John, earlier you'd mentioned that data might be excluded based on a time frame. Do exclusions have expiration dates where the data would be published after that date? And then if both you and Mark could comment on this, but quickly since we are at the end of our time, is the sensitive data review and approval process published or available for others' review? Does the process include a committee review, and if so, how was that committee formed and how is it managed?
Okay, shall I take the expiration dates?
Yep.
That was directed to me. Yes, we ask in the form that we get people to fill in, we ask them to put an expiration date of the exclusion, and we have a team here who will go back and revisit those expiration dates on a regular basis to see can they, offices can then ask for an extension if the circumstance that was originally there still exists, but we don't allow open-ended exclusions anymore. We ask people to put an end date to it, and then we'll go back and challenge them on that. And some things will be time-bound, and in fact, for some of the procurement stuff, it's actually system controls that runs that exclusion, so that we know when a project is in active procurement. When it comes out of active procurement, there's a flag gets set, and the information gets released automatically. So that there's some things you can build in to ensure a time-bound nature to it. In terms of the data review and who reviews that, every month we review all of the new exclusions on all of the new projects with the minister. So as you can expect, that probably means that there's a couple of preparation meetings and sessions for the internal team to review that before presenting that to the minister. And that process is really quite robust, and it gives us a good feel for what's coming up. The minister can then monitor trends. They can ask quite pertinent questions about things, and that's a good level of scrutiny for an organization like ours.
Great, thanks. Mark, any last quick comments? You might be
I'll
on
just
mute.
say
There we go.
that, you know, at UNDP we don't have nearly as a mature process as John does. Really, we have only had a handful of exceptions in the time we've been doing this, and that's dealt with in my office and the legal office. And we're looking in 2015 to putting a more mature process around both the exceptions piece and also appeals from the public for information disclosure if we deny some particular request for access to information. So that's on the roadmap for 2015. But I mean, we're talking, I think we've denied one request for information in 2 years. So I think the reality is we don't have that many exceptions, either internally to not disclose or external requests to have us disclose. It's been done on a pretty ad hoc basis, and I think that while I'm deadly serious about data privacy and protecting data, I think that in the context of IATI, it's a really manageable situation, and I wouldn't get too caught up in it if you're trying to implement it.
Great. Well, we have reached the end of our time. Thank you, John and Mark, again so much for joining us and sharing your experiences. And thanks for all of you in the audience for joining us as well. I hope you found it useful. Just a quick note to say that we have recorded this webinar and we'll be sharing the recording, and I'll also be sharing the presentations afterwards. So again, thank you very much and hope you all enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.